Lin Zhen had never let blindness stop him from doing anything. The fact that he couldn't see the world didn't bother him. He'd learned how to feel it, how to hear it, how to taste it with every sense his body could muster. In a world where sight was king, he had become a legend in a sport where vision was nothing but a handicap, and today, just like every other day, he was going to prove that even the blind could rule the arena. The crowd was deafening. The air in the Vibrashock arena hummed with the buzz of anticipation, and the floor, engineered to respond to every movement in the space, vibrated beneath Lin's feet as he prepared for his next match. Spectators who could see didn't know the half of it. They didn't know that Lin, standing in the center of that ring, was about to rely on something far beyond their ability to comprehend. He was going to rely on vibrations. The announcer's voice boomed from above, but Lin barely heard him. What mattered now was the hum in the floor beneath him, the vibrations coming from his opponent's position, the subtle shifts in the air where his opponent stood. Every movement sent a wave through the space, a pulse Lin could read with uncanny precision, as if the world itself whispered its secrets to him. He grinned. The opponent in front of him didn't have a chance. Lin Zhen had become a champion in Vibrashock, a sport that combined high-speed combat and cutting-edge tech. Players wore special suits embedded with advanced sensors, allowing them to fight, dodge, and outmaneuver one another using nothing but the vibrations created by their movement. The audience saw the dazzling acrobatics, the flips, the insane stunts, all of it choreographed to perfection. But for Lin, it was about something simpler, feeling the vibrations in the air, interpreting them, and acting before his opponent had even thought of their next move. And today, he was ready to show off. He squared his shoulders, letting the floor beneath him pulse through his boots. The arena was dark save for the spotlight on him and the sickeningly sharp hum of the energy field around him. This match wasn't going to be like the others. He could feel it in the air. The crowd roared as the gate on the opposite side of the ring opened, and his challenger stepped into the arena. Yu Ming. At first, Lin didn't know what to make of him. Most challengers walked in with the typical arrogance, or at least the nervous energy of someone about to face a giant. Not Yu Ming. He walked in with a stillness, a cold precision that sent an involuntary chill through Lin's body. He couldn't see his eyes, but Lin could feel the gaze cutting into him. A vibration of intensity rippled through the air as Yu Ming adjusted his stance, his posture sharp and calculating. Lin's mind spun as he sized up his opponent. Yu Ming was dressed in the standard Vibrashock suit, the dark fabric hugging his body. But there was something off, something unfamiliar. Lin couldn't quite put his finger on it, but he knew one thing for certain: this wasn't going to be like his usual matches. The buzzer sounded, and the match began. Lin made the first move. He lunged forward with a fast, almost reckless sweep of his arms. He relied on his usual tactic, unpredictability. A swift feint to the left, a quick right jab, a low kick to throw off his opponent's rhythm. The crowd cheered, but Lin's focus was solely on the vibrations radiating from Yu Ming's body. At first, Yu Ming barely reacted. He let Lin's initial moves wash over him, then bam, he was gone. A blur of motion that left Lin grasping at air. Lin felt the air shift, just a faint hum in the floor before his opponent's fist collided with his stomach. Lin gasped as the shockwave from the blow traveled through his suit, and he staggered back, disoriented. A perfect hit. Lin barely had time to recover before Yu Ming moved again, this time with a lightning-fast roundhouse kick. It was a move that, despite the lack of vision, Lin should have been able to predict. But this time, he couldn't read the signals fast enough. Yu Ming's movement was too sharp, too precise. It was as if Yu Ming's body had synchronized with Lin's every step, as if he was anticipating each one. Lin spun out of the way just in time, his muscles screaming from the impact, but something in the air was off. Yu Ming wasn't just moving with speed, he was moving with exactness. The crowd's roar was deafening, but Lin barely heard it. He was trying to feel Yu Ming, catch a glimpse of the pattern in the way his body vibrated through the air, but Yu Ming was elusive. Each movement was a counter to Lin's own. He could barely follow it, much less anticipate it. What the hell is going on? In the silence of his own mind, Lin processed the sensations flooding him. Yu Ming wasn't just fast, he was identical. The frequencies, the rhythms, the pulses of energy in the air, they were the same. Yu Ming wasn't following Lin's movements, he was mirroring them. Every feint, every twist of Lin's body was reflected back at him with exact precision. Lin staggered back, feeling a new kind of panic surge through him. He'd always been the best. The implant, the technology, it was what made him unbeatable. But this was different. Why Yu Ming wasn't using just any implant. Lin had felt it. Yu Ming's implant was almost identical to his own. A cold wave of realization hit Lin. Yu Ming wasn't just another competitor. He was a mirror image. An exact replica, and that meant the rules had changed. Come on, Lin. What's the matter? Yu Ming's voice cut through the hum of the arena. It was calm, almost mocking. You don't like the mirror? Lin's hands clenched into fists. He wasn't used to this. He'd always been the one in control, the one who adapted the game to his own rhythm. But Yu Ming was no longer just a competitor. He was an extension of Lin himself, and that was the problem. Lin's greatest asset, his ability to predict, to feel vibrations before they happened, was now being used against him. The crowd went wild. They couldn't see what Lin could feel, the subtle but intense shifts in the air as Yu Ming moved. The audience cheered, unaware of the mental chess match unfolding in real time. Lin gritted his teeth, his body a coil of tension. He needed to adjust. He couldn't rely on the vibrations alone. His implant was good, but this wasn't about who had the better tech, it was about who could outthink the other. Who could feel the future before it came. Lin closed his eyes, centering himself. No more reliance on just his body's senses. He needed to trust his mind, his instincts, his ability to stay unpredictable, even if Yu Ming could mimic his every move. He focused on Yu Ming's presence, on the empty space between them. It wasn't about fighting the man in front of him. It was about fighting the space, the tension, the hesitation. The feeling before the movement. That was where the victory lay. Lin took a deep breath, releasing the tension in his chest. Then, without warning, he broke into motion again, but this time, it was different. He wasn't thinking about Yu Ming's movements, or about his own moves at all. He simply reacted. His body surged forward with an energy that wasn't purely physical, it was mental, emotional, visceral. A fast jab. A sharp pivot to the left. A sudden dive. And he let instinct guide him completely. Why Yu Ming's footsteps faltered. For a split second, Lin had thrown him off just enough. Lin smiled to himself. This was the real game. The crowd gasped as Lin executed a flip in midair, landing with a solid thud on the arena floor. The vibrations of the impact sent ripples through the air, and Lin knew, without seeing it, that Yu Ming was just a half step behind. The game was on. Lin Jun felt the floor vibrate under his feet as he landed, every muscle tense but steady. The move was not perfect, but it was enough to break Yu Ming's rhythm. For a moment, he sensed a hesitation in his opponent, a fraction of a second where Yu Ming didn't react with the same cold, mechanical precision as before. That small window was all Lin needed. He was no longer just reading the vibrations. He was feeling the atmosphere of the arena. There was something primal in it now, a hum in the air, a deep pulse beneath his skin that told him everything he needed to know. It was like the world was pushing him forward, urging him to keep going, to never stop. Why Yu Ming was close. Too close. Lin could feel his presence, the exact vibrations of his opponent's suit, the way his feet scraped across the floor, the subtle flick of his wrist. Every movement was measured, a calculation, a counter to Lin's every action. But now Lin wasn't just reacting to him. He was anticipating, not from what he could see but from what he could feel. Lin launched himself forward again, his legs burning with the effort, but there was no doubt in his mind now. Yu Ming's movements had become predictable, and Lin's pulse matched the beat of his own heart. It was the way he moved, the way he breathed, the way he shifted in the air. Yu Ming's precision was perfect, too perfect. Lin could sense the difference now, the flaw in his opponent's own calculated game. He wasn't the real threat. Not anymore. Lin feigned a lunge to the right, forcing Yu Ming to move. And when his opponent shifted, Lin sprang the trap. He spun, a full 360-degree arc, and before Yu Ming could react, Lin slammed into him with a powerful, whirling elbow, knocking him off balance. The crowd gasped as Yu Ming stumbled, his posture momentarily wavering, his aura of perfect calm broken. Lin didn't give him time to recover. He followed up with a series of quick, sharp jabs, each one carefully placed, each one designed to throw Yu Ming further off his perfect rhythm. It was like punching through a fog, feeling the vibrations but never quite finding what he was looking for. Yu Ming was a puzzle Lin couldn't quite solve, but now, for the first time in this match, Lin wasn't just waiting for Yu Ming's next move. He was forcing him into a position where he had to react. While Yu Ming tried to regain his footing, using a calculated counter, but Lin was already one step ahead. He ducked under Yu Ming's high punch and slid to the side, putting just enough space between them. His heartbeat was fast but steady now, in perfect sync with the pulse of the arena. He could feel the heat in the air, the vibrations from the crowd, the reverberation in the floor beneath his boots. He was so aware of every tiny shift around him that it almost felt like he could reach out and touch the space itself. While Yu Ming wasn't backing down. His face remained impassive, as if Lin's every move was nothing but a minor inconvenience. But Lin could feel it the minute shift in the air when Yu Ming's confidence wavered. The briefest flicker of uncertainty, Lin knew he had to push further. He needed to do something that Yu Ming couldn't anticipate, something that would break his precision. Something unthinkable. The arena seemed to shrink around him, the vibrations growing more intense. Lin's vision was a blur of sensory information, too much to process consciously, so he let go of the thought entirely. He felt the rhythm of the fight, the rhythm of his own body, until the beat became his own heartbeat, and everything around him melted into pure, instinctive movement, and then he did it. Without thinking, Lin launched himself straight toward Yu Ming, diving at him with the full force of his body. Yu Ming was fast, but Lin was faster. He felt the shockwave of the air as he flew through it, saw nothing but the vibrations pulsing around him. His limbs moved with a primal urgency, and for one brief, perfect moment, he was no longer a fighter in an arena. He was a force of nature, moving through time and space with an unstoppable speed. While Yu Ming tried to raise his arms in defense, but Lin anticipated the move. With a sharp twist, Lin changed direction in midair, slamming into Yu Ming's side and sending them both to the ground in a tangled heap. The impact rattled the arena, and the crowd erupted in a wild cheer. But Lin barely noticed the noise. His ears were filled with the vibrations of his own body, the beating of his own heart, and the soft, steady hum of Yu Ming's breath. For a split second, the two of them lay there, tangled in a heap on the floor. Lin's fingers pressed against Yu Ming's suit, feeling the slight warmth of his skin beneath the fabric. He could feel the steady pulse of Yu Ming's heartbeat, steady and controlled, but Lin could feel the slight tremor in it, an imperceptible shift. Yu Ming was trying to hold on to his composure, but Lin could feel his opponent's own subtle slip, a crack in his armor. Lin's hand shot forward, locking onto Yu Ming's arm, twisting it behind him in one fluid motion. Yu Ming fought back, but the control was slipping from his grasp. Lin's body pressed against his opponent's, and he could feel the vibrations of Yu Ming's movements grow less certain, less precise, and then, just as Lin was about to apply the final pressure, Yu Ming did something unexpected. He let go. All at once, the resistance vanished, and Yu Ming went limp, his body going slack beneath Lin. For a moment, Lin was caught off guard. The sudden shift in his opponent's posture sent an unexpected wave of confusion through Lin's mind. What the hell? Yu Ming's voice came then, low and almost resigned. I see now, he said, his words clipped but oddly calm. You can't fight what you can't predict. I thought I could mimic you, but I didn't realize how much I was relying on the same things you do. Lin's hand froze for a moment, his thoughts racing. What was Yu Ming saying? Had Lin somehow cracked him? Or was this just another strategy, another way to get him to lower his guard? Yu Ming sighed, as if the whole match had become a game of chess to him. You don't need this, he said, tapping the side of his head where the retinal implant was embedded. You've never needed it. You're still the best without all of this technology. I just wanted to see if I could be better, if I could make it work like you. Lin didn't speak for a moment. He could still feel the slight tremor in Yu Ming's chest, the uncertainty in his opponent's movements. It was strange, this moment of calm. For the first time since the fight had started, Lin wasn't entirely sure what he was supposed to do next. The crowd's roar swelled again, but Lin barely heard it. He looked down at Yu Ming, who now met his gaze with a rare, almost amused smile. Lin had to admit he hadn't expected this. Finally, Lin spoke, his voice low but steady. You came to beat me. But you're not gonna do it that way. Not today. Yu Ming's smile widened. Maybe not. But we both know it's only a matter of time before someone else does. Lin's chest tightened. He knew what Yu Ming was saying. The technology, the implants, they were the future of the sport. And whether or not Lin relied on them, the world was moving in that direction, but right now, in this moment, it didn't matter. He stood up, stepping away from Yu Ming, offering him a hand. The fight was over, for now. Lin Jun stepped back, his breath still steady but his mind racing. Yu Ming's words lingered in the air like a haunting echo. It's only a matter of time before someone else does. The arena had quieted, the deafening roars of the crowd growing distant as the weight of Yu Ming's statement settled in Lin's chest. He could still hear the hum of the artificial energy in the walls, feel the faint tremor of the floor beneath his feet. But the world felt different now. The fight was over, but something inside him had shifted. Why Yu Ming slowly rose to his feet, wiping a trickle of sweat from his brow. His expression was unreadable, like a man who had come to terms with something too complex to explain in words. When he met Lin's gaze again, there was no hint of rivalry, only a strange sort of respect. You've got something I don't, Yu Ming said quietly, his tone almost introspective. It's not the technology. It's you. You're more than just the implant. I can feel it. Lin didn't answer right away. Instead, he studied Yu Ming, feeling the raw energy still buzzing in the air between them. The truth was, Yu Ming had never really been an opponent in the way others had been. Sure, they had clashed physically, but what really stung was that quiet realization Yu Ming had sparked in him. Lin had built his entire career, his identity, on the strength of the implant, the technology that allowed him to see what others couldn't. But Yu Ming had just made him realize something undeniable. Even if he had the best tech in the world, it still wasn't enough. There was always someone out there who could play the same game, who could match his every move. Lin had learned that the hard way today. You wanted to beat me, Lin said finally, his voice steady, but the weight of his words hung heavy in the silence. But you're not me. And that's why you couldn't. You can't just replicate what I do. Yu Ming nodded slowly. Maybe. But I'll get closer. We all will. Lin's thoughts lingered on Yu Ming's words. He couldn't deny the truth of them. The world wasn't static. Everything was changing. Whether he liked it or not, technology was going to keep pushing the boundaries of what was possible, and sooner or later, even the best implants would be surpassed. And when that happened, the fight wouldn't be about who had the most advanced technology, it would be about who could think faster, who could adapt quicker. Lin felt the ground vibrate again beneath him, a subtle reminder that the game wasn't over yet. There would always be new challenges. But right now, it didn't matter. He had beaten Yu Ming. And he had done it on his terms. With no technology, no implants, just instinct and willpower. You're right about one thing, Lin said, meeting Yu Ming's gaze. I don't need this. He reached up, tapping the side of his head where the retinal implant was embedded. But I still want it. Yu Ming raised an eyebrow, an amused smile flickering across his face. Why? Lin's response was simple, his eyes gleaming with a mix of defiance and confidence. Because it gives me a chance to keep moving forward. And as long as I can keep moving, I'll always be one step ahead. Yu Ming chuckled, shaking his head. I think we'll both be fighting this fight for a long time. With one final glance at his opponent, Lin turned away, walking toward the center of the arena. The lights dimmed around him, and he felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that always followed a victory. But this time, it felt different. The fight had been more than just a physical contest. It had been a confrontation with the future itself. The crowd's applause grew louder, shaking the air around him, but Lin barely noticed. His mind was already elsewhere, contemplating the future that awaited him, the path ahead that seemed so uncertain now. The world was moving fast, and it was impossible to know where it would go next. He had been a star in a sport built on technology, built on the idea that sensory enhancements were the key to victory. But now, he wasn't sure what came next. He'd always been able to rely on his senses, on the implant that had made him who he was. But now, even that felt fragile. What would happen when someone else, someone younger, someone hungrier, came along with a better implant? Or worse, what if they didn't need an implant at all? Lin paused at the edge of the arena, the sound of the crowd blurring into the background. The truth was, even though he had won today, he couldn't help but feel that something was slipping through his fingers. The game was changing, and no matter how skilled he was, there would always be someone who could do it better, faster, stronger. He thought back to Yu Ming's words. It's only a matter of time before someone else does. There was a harsh truth to them, but there was also something else, an unspoken challenge. If technology kept advancing, then the game wouldn't be about who had the best tools. It would be about who could push those tools to their limits, who could adapt in ways that no one else could, and maybe that was the real test. Not the implant, not the technology, but how far Lin could push himself. How far anyone could push themselves. As the final buzzer sounded, signaling the end of the match, Lin turned back toward the center of the arena. The crowd was still roaring, but his thoughts were far away, focused on something deeper. His journey was far from over. The victory, the title, all of it was meaningless if he couldn't keep moving forward. And moving forward meant embracing uncertainty, embracing change, because no one could predict what would come next. The crowd's voices filled the air once again, louder than before, but this time, Lin didn't hear the cheers. He only heard the hum in his body, the vibrations underfoot, the pulse of the world shifting around him. He was ready for whatever came next. But this time, it wouldn't be about who had the better technology. It would be about who could adapt. Who could push past the limits, and Lin Zhen was determined to prove that, no matter what, he would always find a way to stay ahead. As the lights of the arena flickered one last time, Lin Zhen stood tall, a champion not just because of what he could feel, but because of how far he was willing to go.